A creature this size hauled up in a fishing net should be instantly identifiable to any working crew. Twice in modern history, it wasn't. Once a Navy vessel chasing a routine equipment test found something snagged in its own anchor line, and once a mackerel trawler pulled up something its own captain couldn't name. What happened next split scientists for decades, and neither case ended the way anyone expected. The claim with no captain attached. Search for the story of a fishing captain who filmed a megalodon circling his boat and got told to stay quiet, and you run into the exact same wall every other megalodon rumor eventually hits. No version names the captain, no version names the boat, the company that supposedly silenced him, or the date and location where any of this happened. No version links to a Coast Guard report, a maritime news article, or footage anyone outside the story itself has ever actually seen. That absence matters because real events involving fishing vessels tend to leave a genuine paper trail behind them. Boats have registration numbers. Captains have licenses tracked by maritime authorities. Crews talk, sometimes years later, to reporters, podcasters, or family members. A story that supposedly involves a real boat, a real company, and a real cover-up should eventually produce at least one of those loose threads. And this particular claim has never produced any of them across years of its circulating online. What is genuinely true, and considerably stranger than most people realize, is that real fishing crews really have hauled up massive, unidentifiable creatures from the ocean more than once in modern history. Two of those cases are extremely well documented, involve real named individuals, and ended in almost exactly opposite ways. Understanding both of them, and a much older case that predates modern cameras entirely, tells you far more about how a story like this could realistically play out than any unverifiable viral claim ever could. Why a captain would actually get told to stay quiet. Before getting into those real cases, it helps to understand that captains and local officials genuinely do sometimes choose to downplay unusual marine sightings, just not for the dramatic reason viral stories usually imply. In July 2015, after a shark bit an 8-year-old boy in shallow water off Surf City, North Carolina, the town's own manager stated plainly that officials had no plans to issue a broader warning to swimmers, even as multiple other shark bites were being reported at nearby beaches within the same 2-week stretch. The reasoning given was ordinary and practical, a judgment call about what actually constituted a serious enough hazard to justify alarming an entire beach community, not a conspiracy to hide evidence of anything. That kind of quiet, practical decision-making happens constantly along coastlines that depend heavily on tourism dollars. Beach towns weigh public safety against the very real economic cost of a panic, and officials sometimes choose measured caution over a loud public announcement, especially when the underlying sighting is ambiguous rather than clearly, immediately dangerous. Modern coastal communities have also built entire systems around managing this exact tension, openly rather than hiding it, with drone patrols, jet ski response teams, and public notification flags now standard at many beaches specifically, so officials can respond to a sighting without needing to suppress anything from public view in the first place. None of that resembles a corporation deliberately deleting footage of an extinct 40-foot predator. It looks more like ordinary small-town risk management, the kind of decision that happens dozens of times every summer at beaches across the world without ever becoming a national headline. That real mundane version of quiet handling stands in sharp contrast to what a genuine megalodon sighting would actually require covering up, given the sheer, undeniable size and violence such an animal would bring to any encounter. Understanding just how differently real crews have handled their own encounters with something they could not identify going back more than 2 centuries shows exactly how far a real event tends to travel once it happens, whether the people involved wanted attention or not. The beast that washed ashore before anyone had a camera. long before any fishing trawler or Navy research vessel existed to document a strange sea creature, a storm on September 25, 1808, deposited an enormous, decomposing carcass onto the shore of Stronsay, a small island in Scotland's Orkney Islands. A local farmer named John Peace, out fishing near Rothiesholm Point, spotted what he first assumed was a beached whale, surrounded by circling seabirds, only to discover on closer inspection an animal unlike anything he recognized. Measured by a carpenter and two farmers using what tools they had on hand, the carcass stretched an astonishing 55 feet long, with a long neck-like structure, a small head, 3 pairs of fin-like limbs described as paws, and a texture on its skin that felt smooth stroked one direction and rough stroked the other. Word of the discovery reached Edinburgh, where anatomist John Barclay examined witness testimony and preserved body parts, including vertebrae and hair samples, and confidently declared the creature genuine physical proof of the mythical great sea snake long described in maritime folklore, formally naming it Alcedrus pontoppidan. Barclay's declaration carried real institutional weight, backed by the respected Wernerian Natural History Society of Edinburgh, and for a period it stood as one of the most serious scientific claims of a living sea monster ever put forward by a credentialed expert. That confident identification did not survive contact with a rival anatomist working in London. Sir Everard Home, who had personally studied an intact basking shark, landed at Hastings that same year, examined the same evidence Barclay had reviewed, and reached a completely different conclusion, identifying the Stronsay carcass as nothing more than a large, badly decomposed basking shark. Home also quietly revised Barclay's dramatic 55-foot measurement downward to something closer to 30 to 36 feet, arguing the original witnesses had likely overestimated the length of already stretched and distorted decomposing tissue. A separate Scottish professor, if you're enjoying this deep dive, hitting subscribe means you won't miss the next one. John Goodsir reached the same basking shark conclusion decades later in 1849, reviewing the surviving physical evidence independently and confirming Holmes' original skepticism had held up. Why basking sharks keep fooling people the same exact way. The reason a basking shark carcass so reliably produces this kind of sea monster illusion comes down to a very specific, well-documented decomposition pattern that researchers have now confirmed across multiple separate incidents spanning more than 2 centuries. As a basking shark's body breaks down in water, its entire gill apparatus falls away first, taking the shark's distinctive wide jaw structure along with it, and leaving behind only a small rounded skull attached to an exposed section of spine, an arrangement that looks remarkably like a small head sitting atop a long, slender neck. The shark's large triangular dorsal fin decays away. Next, sometimes leaving behind just the fin's internal supporting rays, which can resemble a coarse mane running along the animal's back once the surrounding skin and muscle tissue also break down into loose, hair-like strands. Because a basking shark's backbone runs only into the upper portion of its tail fin rather than through the center, the lower tail fluke tends to fall away during decomposition too, leaving behind a long, thin, whip-like tail that looks nothing like the shark's original triangular fin shape. The shark's paired pectoral fins, and sometimes its smaller pelvic fins, often remain attached throughout this process, but decomposition distorts their shape into something that can look, with only a little imagination, like a set of limbs or paws. That exact, repeatable sequence explains why witnesses across radically different centuries and locations, Orkney fishermen in 1808 and a Japanese fishing crew in 1977, independently arrived at almost the same description: a long-necked, small-headed, maned creature with paired limb-like fins. It is not a coincidence that both incidents involve the same species decomposing in roughly the same predictable way. It is a genuinely well-documented biological pattern, confirmed by multiple independent anatomists working more than 150 years apart, and it explains far more real-world sea serpent sightings than any single confirmed unknown species ever has. The real case of a captain who threw the evidence back. On April 25, 1977, the Japanese trawler Zuyo Maru, fishing about 30 kilometers east of Christchurch, New Zealand, pulled up a massive, badly decomposed carcass from a depth of roughly 300 meters, tangled inside its fishing net. The remains stretched close to 10 meters long, with a long neck-like structure, 4 large reddish fins, and a tail extending roughly 2 meters, an appearance so unusual that the crew immediately nicknamed it Nessie and became genuinely convinced they had found something science had never documented before. Michihiko Yano, a section chief for the Taiyo Fishery Company, who also happened to have formal biology training, took photographs, sketches, and careful measurements of the carcass on the spot. Despite that clear scientific interest from at least one crew member, the ship's captain, Akira Tanaka, ultimately made the call to dump the carcass back into the ocean, worried that keeping the badly decomposing remains aboard risked spoiling the rest of the ship's actual commercial catch. Before it went back overboard, the crew preserved several tissue samples, along with Yano's photographs and sketches, giving researchers back in Japan something concrete to actually study even without the physical carcass itself in hand. That single practical decision, protecting a fishing company's cargo rather than any deliberate cover-up, turned into what Japanese media eventually dubbed a full-blown plesiosaur craze once the photographs reached the public, popular enough that Japan issued a commemorative postage stamp depicting the creature later that same year. The shipping company reportedly ordered other vessels in the area to try locating the discarded carcass again, without success. That detail alone should sound familiar to anyone who has ever heard a modern viral story claim a company tried to erase evidence of something strange at sea. Except here, the full sequence of events, the company's name, the captain's name, and the crew members' photographs are all genuinely documented and still available for anyone to examine today. What the scientists actually found afterward. Japanese researchers convened a formal scientific symposium in September 1977, specifically to study the Zuyo Maru case, drawing more than a dozen specialists across biochemistry, ichthyology, paleontology, and comparative anatomy. Using the preserved tissue samples, biochemists tested for a specific structural protein called elastoidin, found exclusively in sharks and rays rather than in any bony fish or marine reptile. The samples matched known basking shark elastoidin closely enough across 20 separate amino acid measurements that researchers described the correspondence as a striking similarity, pointing strongly toward a basking shark origin rather than anything reptilian. That conclusion also lined up with the same well-documented decomposition pattern already confirmed in the Stronsay case more than 150 years earlier, right down to the missing lower jaw, the displaced dorsal fin, and the misleadingly slender remaining tail. A scientist from Britain's Natural History Museum, reviewing the case that same year, reached the same basking shark conclusion independently, based purely on the photographs and available measurements, arriving at essentially the same verdict Sir Everard Home had reached about a completely different carcass on the other side of the world nearly 2 centuries earlier. Even with that fairly strong scientific consensus, the case never became 100% settled to everyone's satisfaction, since some researchers, including creationist writer John Gertson in a 2001 paper, continued arguing the photographic evidence for a paired set of fins fit less comfortably with a simple decomposing shark. That lingering disagreement, real scientists studying real physical samples and still not reaching complete unanimous agreement decades later, is exactly the kind of honest, ongoing scientific uncertainty a genuine mystery produces. A world away from a viral video that offers no samples, no photographs, and no scientists willing to publicly examine anything at all. The shark caught by accident that rewrote textbooks. Just 5 months before the Zuyo Maru incident, on November 15, 1976, a completely different kind of accidental encounter unfolded roughly 40 kilometers off the coast of Oahu, Hawaii. A United States Navy research vessel, hauling in a parachute-style sea anchor from a depth of about 165 meters, found an enormous, previously unknown shark tangled directly in the anchor lines. The animal measured about 4.46 meters long and weighed roughly 750 kilograms, featuring an enormous, soft, rubbery mouth, unlike anything crew members had ever seen on any known shark species, a feature that eventually earned it the name Megamouth. Unlike the Zuyo Maru crew, the Navy vessel's personnel and the scientists working with them treated the discovery as a serious research priority from the very first moment. The specimen was transported to Hawaii's Bishop Museum, where ichthyologists eventually determined it represented not just a new species, but an entirely new genus and family of shark altogether, later named Megachasma pelagios. Formal scientific description of the species took years to reach publication, finally appearing in a 1983 paper in the Proceedings of the California Academy of Sciences, a full 7 years after the original discovery, a delay some involved researchers have described as only finally motivated by colleagues good-naturedly pressuring the lead author to stop sitting on such an important find. The Megamouth shark remains one of the rarest large animals ever documented, with somewhere around 270 confirmed sightings or specimens recorded across the nearly 50 years since that first accidental capture, the majority of those recorded off the coast of Taiwan. It took 8 more years after the 1976 discovery before a second confirmed specimen turned up, tangled in a swordfish gillnet off Santa Catalina Island, California, in 1984. Researchers have since made real, incremental progress studying the species, tagging a megamouth off Dana Point, California, in 1990 to track its movement for the first time, and capturing the first ever photographs of one feeding in the wild off the Philippines in 1998. Genuinely new discoveries about the species have continued arriving as recently as 2024, when researchers confirmed through tagging studies that megamouths migrate vertically, staying deep during daylight hours and rising toward the surface at night to feed. Why one crew kept theirs and another threw it back. Comparing these cases side by side reveals something genuinely useful about how these situations actually tend to play out in the real world. The Zuyo Maru was a commercial fishing vessel focused entirely on catching mackerel for profit, and its captain made a purely economic decision under real-time pressure, weighing an unusual scientific curiosity against the practical risk of losing an entire hold's worth of paying catch to the smell of rotting flesh. The Megamouth discovery, by contrast, happened aboard a Navy research vessel already staffed with people whose actual job was scientific observation, working alongside institutions with the resources and motivation to properly document and preserve whatever turned up. That distinction matters enormously for understanding why a real Megalodon sighting would almost certainly survive contact with the public, rather than quietly disappearing. Commercial fishing crews do sometimes discard unusual finds purely for practical reasons, exactly as Akira Tanaka did in 1977, but even then, photographs, sketches, and tissue samples still made it into scientific hands and eventually into published, peer-reviewed research. An animal the size of a 50 to 60-foot megalodon would be enormously harder to simply toss overboard unnoticed compared to a 10-meter carcass already tangled in a net, and would almost certainly draw far more immediate attention from crew members using personal phones long before any single captain or company representative could plausibly intervene. Modern smartphones and satellite communication also make the Zuyo Maru scenario, quietly deciding what to do with a strange find entirely on your own boat with no outside contact, considerably harder to replicate today than it was in 1977, when a fishing vessel at sea had far less capacity to instantly share footage with anyone beyond its own crew. That shift in available technology is worth sitting with directly, since it changes how plausible any modern suppression story really is compared to decades past. How often this actually happens at sea. Genuine encounters with large, unidentified, or exceptionally rare marine animals are not as vanishingly rare as people might assume, even if any individual animal species involved often is. Basking sharks themselves, the animal researchers eventually identified behind both the Stronsay beast and the Zuyo Maru carcass, are known to occasionally swim in loose lines near the surface, with their dorsal and tail fins breaking the water in a way that has independently fooled observers into reporting sea serpents on numerous separate occasions throughout history, entirely apart from either famous incident. Even setting aside decomposing carcasses, genuinely rare living animals keep turning up in front of fishing crews and researchers on a fairly regular basis, simply because so much of the deep ocean remains poorly studied. A remotely operated vehicle finally filmed a live juvenile colossal squid in its natural habitat for the first time only in 2025, more than a century after scientists first confirmed the species existed purely from washed-up beaks and carcasses. That kind of genuine, still unfolding discovery timeline shows the ocean absolutely can still produce authentic, headline-worthy surprises captured on real, verifiable footage from named research teams working for known institutions. What separates those real discoveries from an unverifiable Megalodon claim is not that the ocean has stopped producing surprises. It is that every genuine case, from the 1808 Stronsay beast through the Megamouth shark and the Zuyo Maru carcass to the 2025 colossal squid footage, comes with named witnesses, named institutions, and physical evidence that other scientists were eventually able to examine and argue about openly. A real encounter leaves fingerprints. A story with none is missing exactly the kind of trace evidence that even a crew choosing to throw something back into the sea, or a storm depositing a carcass on a remote beach with no camera anywhere nearby, still somehow managed to leave behind. Why Megalodon specifically doesn't fit this pattern. Layered on top of that missing evidence problem sits Megalodon's own well-documented extinction, which makes a surviving population considerably harder to reconcile with known science than either the Stronsay beast, the Zuyo Maru mystery, or the Megamouth discovery ever were. Fossil evidence places Megalodon's disappearance at roughly 3.6 million years ago, tracked through well-dated fossil sites in California and Baja California, where the species' distinctive teeth simply stop appearing in the sediment record entirely after that point. A 2023 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences added a specific biological reason behind that timeline, finding through chemical isotope analysis that Megalodon maintained a body temperature roughly 13 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than its surrounding seawater, a trait called regional endothermy that would have required enormous, constant amounts of food to sustain. As global oceans cooled sharply during the Pliocene epoch, and the large whale species Megalodon, depended on for food, either died out or migrated toward colder water, the shark's own warm water physiology could not follow, and that same energy-hungry trait likely became a fatal liability rather than an advantage. Every one of the real cases described throughout this video, the Stronsay beast, the Megamouth shark, and the Zuyo Maru carcass, involved animals that were already known or at least biologically plausible candidates for existing somewhere in the modern ocean: a basking shark, a genuinely undiscovered deep-sea species, and again, a basking shark. Megalodon carries a specific, well-dated, chemically supported extinction story working directly against it in a way none of those three real cases ever had to overcome. That distinction is exactly why researchers treat Megalodon's extinction as settled, while still keeping an open mind about what else the ocean's least explored corners might eventually turn up. What a real suppressed sighting would actually look like. A genuine corporate or government effort to suppress footage of something as significant as a living megalodon would need to survive contact with an enormous number of separate people, the boat's full crew, any onshore company staff who process the footage, and potentially outside contractors or officials who handled communications equipment. Every one of the real cases described throughout this video, by contrast, involved information reaching the public specifically because multiple separate people, sometimes across separate countries and centuries, retained physical evidence, told their own version of events, or published their own findings independently of each other. The Zuyo Maru case reached international science journals within months, specifically because Yano's photographs and the preserved tissue samples moved through multiple hands, from the ship's crew to Japanese research institutions to international publications like New Scientist, covering the story that same year. The Stronsay beast reached formal scientific debate through sworn witness testimony given to local justices of the peace, preserved specimen parts shipped to Edinburgh, and two competing anatomists publishing dueling interpretations that historians still study today. That kind of natural multi-step spread is exactly what tends to happen once genuinely unusual physical evidence exists anywhere, and it is precisely the kind of spread a supposed megalodon sighting has never actually produced, despite years of the claim circulating in various retellings online. None of this means every strange thing that happens on a boat far from shore automatically becomes public knowledge. It means a real event involving multiple witnesses, physical evidence, and any kind of institutional involvement tends to leave detectable traces somewhere. Exactly the kind of traces still findable centuries or decades later in the Stronsay, Zuyo Maru, and Megamouth cases, and exactly the kind of traces still completely absent from any Megalodon deletion story told so far. The speculative question worth asking. None of this closes the door on genuine mystery still waiting somewhere in the ocean, since the real historical record actually supports taking that broader possibility seriously. Less than a quarter of the world's ocean floor has ever been mapped in real detail. An entirely new species, along with genuinely startling first-ever photographs of known but never before witnessed behavior, keep turning up on a fairly regular basis, from the 2025 colossal squid footage to Megamouth sightings still being logged in scattered locations decades after that first 1976 discovery. What the historical record does not support is the specific shape this particular viral claim takes: an extinct, chemically ruled out species, caught on camera by an unnamed captain, then suppressed by an unnamed company with zero surviving trace of the event anywhere. If something genuinely unusual is still out there waiting to be found, the far more likely candidates look like the Megamouth shark once did in 1976, an animal nobody had a name for yet, encountered by people who happened to have both the training and institutional backing to document it properly, rather than quietly discard it, or they look like another basking shark carcass washing ashore somewhere remote enough that the story briefly reignites the exact same 2-century-old debate all over again. That distinction between a genuinely open scientific question and a specific unverifiable claim built to feel true without ever being checkable is worth holding on to the next time a similar story shows up. The ocean absolutely still has surprises left in it. Whether any of them turn out to look anything like the story currently circulating about a silenced captain and a deleted recording remains, Honestly, an open question nobody has produced real evidence for either way. Verdict. Here is where things actually stand. No verified captain, vessel, or company has ever been connected to a claim of a megalodon caught on camera and then suppressed, a pattern consistent with every other version of this specific hoax that has circulated for over a decade. What the real historical record does contain are 3 genuinely documented, well-studied cases of ordinary people encountering massive, unidentified marine animals. The 1808 Stronsay beast that split 2 respected anatomists into open, published disagreement, the 1977 Zuyo Maru carcass, ultimately identified through amino acid testing as another decomposing basking shark, and the 1976 Megamouth shark, an entirely new species discovered by accident aboard a Navy research vessel and formally described in scientific literature 7 years later. All 3 of those real cases produced named individuals, physical evidence, and a documented trail leading from initial discovery through eventual scientific study, even in the Zuyo Maru case, where the actual carcass itself was deliberately returned to the ocean for purely practical reasons. Megalodon's own well-documented extinction, supported by fossil evidence dating to roughly 3.6 million years ago, and reinforced by 2023 chemical research into the shark's own body temperature, sets it apart from any of those 3 real animals, all of which were at least biologically plausible candidates for discovery in a way an extinct, warm-blooded giant shark simply is not. What actually connects every genuine ocean mystery worth taking seriously is a trail of real evidence, real institutions, and real disagreement among actual scientists working from actual physical samples. A story missing every single one of those pieces is not automatically false, simply because the ocean is large and mostly unexplored. It is simply still waiting, more than a decade after it first started circulating, for even one piece of that trail to finally show up. If mysteries like this one interest you, subscribing helps more stories like it find their way to you the moment they come out.